It's time again. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone, and those of you who are new on this call. This is just a place where active citizens, HR professionals, leaders, entrepreneurs just gather and try to make sense of COVID-19 by mustering various and different perspectives. As I've just showed in the previous slide, time has come up for us as something that's foregrounded in so many ways. And thank you, Professor Frans Cilliers, who's also given us some perspectives regarding time. And this last week, we have heard more than ever before from our clients that there's just not enough time. We're running out of time. And we thought this session might fit well because a week ago, we listened to the future, which are our youth. We got some lovely perspectives from the youth, and we decided, well, today maybe let's also get perspective from our past, which are more the elder perspective. And then next week, what we're going to do is we'll share with you today a fantastic tool where we will get inputs from all of you who are more for me than now. What do we have to do now? What do we have to do next? So we'll do that next week. So welcome to today where we've jumped. I'm not sure if it's forward or backwards, but we've jumped to the other perspective. But many of us at the moment are also struggling because we are so overwhelmed, and time sits also in our head. And many of our clients have said, we just don't have enough time for perspective. We don't have enough time to stand back because we are so busy with so many things to do that we don't know what's happened to time. We don't know, as Professor Cilliers said, we don't know what day is today. So we thought it might be a good idea for us to get some idea of, first of all, just to maybe get a tool or learn from William Elliott of Get Things Done that we have on this call. What would be a almost applied mindfulness way? And William, if you could just unmute yourself and share with us, how can I, as Casper, because right now my head is spinning. It's like I've got an electrical clock, a normal clock. I've got a stopwatch in my head. It's spinning and it's so busy. What can we do to help us create extra space so that we can be wiser?
Thank you, Casper. Yes, we are facing, I think we have as a civilization, since we've moved from hunter-gatherer time where there wasn't more than 4 things happening at once: the weather, food, predators, family. So the brain is not wired to deal with more than 4 inputs at a time. Now, I did send you a slide of an X-ray of the human psyche, so of the modern psyche. So if you can just bring that up, it might help just illustrate our point that we're carrying this sense of overload in our brain. And that's not quite the slide yet, but it's a wonderful slide. Let's just wait for that. Okay. There we go. So this is, we're still on, it's coming. Just give it a while to load. So this is, I'm sure if you look at this slide, you can relate to what that feels like. This is what we call an input explosion or input overload. Now, it's not about the information explosion, because if you walk into a library, it's a pretty calm place. The trouble is that there's so much unprocessed and new inputs in the brain that we don't have room, and we need that cognitive space to reflect. And we don't learn from experience, but reflecting on experience. So we need to do something to create that space, and we call that externalizing. And I just want to give you an exercise, and I'll talk a little bit about that after you've done it. So what I want you to do is get a blank piece of paper and a pen. I'm going to give you some very specific instructions for an exercise that we call a mind sweep. So let me just give you a moment to grab that blank sheet of paper and a pen. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you just to write as fast as you can, as many things as you can, things that are pulling on your attention. And it doesn't matter if they're listed somewhere else. You're just going to do a download, a bit like when you plug your Outlook or your email into the internet and download. Some of it will be spam, but don't censor, don't organize, just download. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Just write in a manner that you can read it again, because there's something to do with that information. So, okay, so these are the rules. Write as fast as you can, as many things as you can. It doesn't matter if it's written somewhere else. And just because you've written it down doesn't mean you have to do it. So give yourself permission to write as much as you can. And if you run out of things to write, look at what you've written to see if it'll help you download and extract more. So I'm going to be quiet just for 2 minutes. Think about that personal and professional, everything that you can think of that might be meaningful or useful to consider doing. And it doesn't even have to be that specific. One more minute to go. Try and keep writing. Okay, just bring that entry to a close. You can obviously carry this on afterwards. It's a great exercise to do daily. So at this point, we find that a lot of people feel a mixture of two emotions, grief and relief. There's some relief that it's out there and some hope that this perhaps can be executed or thought about. And the grief part comes from how much it is. And when I work with executives, it can take up to half an hour, an hour just to get everything out. So the golden rule is track everything outside your head in some trusted system. Remember something once and have a capture tool at hand during the day, but not a bad way to start the day with a mind sweep. Once we have it externalized and it comes back through the optical nerve, we can then contrast items, we can prioritize, and we can work out what the very next step is. So when you look at this later, work out, what the next actions are, and try and do the more difficult ones first, because that's going to give you the most boost to your energy levels. And don't be scared to delete stuff that you wrote down. It might just be spam. And the more often you do this, you'll find that the less there is backed up, draining cognitive space. And the more we get externalized, the more freedom we have to do this important stuff that Cas was talking about, of reflecting and making wise decisions. We all have done a draft email before. We need something out physically in draft form before we can make really good decisions between things. So back over to you, Casper.
William, I thank you so much for that. I just want to check with you. So this is almost like a breathing out. This is a way just to almost allow my thinking brain to also relax. Is that what this helps with?
Yes, it's what we call cognitive room. So the brain is not good at tracking many things and clocks up resources, but like the computer with those little circles thinking. So it is an externalization to let the system do the tracking and the remembering, to leave your brain to do the thinking, because we know that a shopping list remembers better than us, but a shopping list can't think. So we all already have those external systems, but it starts with capture. Get it out of your head, and something with which you can then relate to as an object outside of the brain to free the cognitive space.
And can you just repeat again? You mentioned something about reflection and experience in the beginning. Why do we need space and time to reflect? Well, you mentioned something, if I remembered correctly. Can you share that again?
Yeah. We don't learn from experience. And as an older person, I can tell you that that is true. We learn from reflecting on experience. And the quality of the learning is proportional to the quality of the reflecting. That's why it's important to have room to reflect. And we estimate that 40% of the distractions that we experience come from inside, because we're carrying this noise and we're not noticing and applying our best thinking to things, because our mind is so busy churning what it has stored up in a semi fluid form.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, William. Thank you so much. And one of the main reasons why we just did this practice, it's a mindfulness practice to get us here, is also we need some space in our brains for who's up next. We're going to kind of zoom out to outer space in a way. Normally we just zoom to another country, but the question is about perspective of time. What is this time thing? Because to really realize the value of time it's about the elasticity and the perspective. I mean, you can just ask somebody 3 months in lockdown, we understand 3 months, but 1 month, if you ask a mother who gave birth to a premature baby, she understands the value of 1 month. I mean, 1 week, just ask the editor of a weekly newspaper. I mean, 1 hour. I mean, ask 2 lovers who are desperate to meet. They know what 1 hour is. And 1 second is someone who's just escaped or just missed an accident. Or 1 millisecond, you know, ask that guy or that woman who's got a silver medal at the Olympic Games. They know a millisecond. So what is this time thing? Because the perspectives are so different. And we think of nobody else better that can help us understand this. And this is Jordi Osler is a Harvard Business School product. He co-founded and developed the first silicon carbon fabric in South Africa. And Jordi, I'm always intrigued. I did this exercise to give me more space, because when you speak about time, I need all my cognitive ability. What is this? Can you share with us a meta perspective of time? Is it slowing down? Is it stuck? What's happened with time? And what the hell is this time thing, Jordi?
Thank you, Casper. I think from me, my perspective, I try to think in terms of like physics, like go back to my engineering to put things together. And I always try to like say, like, what's the model for this whole time thing? And to do that, the best one I know of is quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is this cool little thing which is filled with uncertainty and is not really real in a sense too, because all the laws that we think apply in the real world seem to break down or they change with quantum mechanics. And the little story starts off with a boson. Okay, a boson, and we'll talk more specifically a photon. A photon has got this peculiar thing of being a particle and a wave. And while it is a wave, we call it pre-collapsing the wave function. This wave can be basically anything. And it's a case of all possibilities exist in the wave function until it is collapsed. And as John Archibald Wheeler said, no phenomenon is a phenomenon until it's an observed phenomenon. So our observation is what we understand collapses this wave function. And as that is done, we take this particle of light and we pull it apart. But we pull it apart into 2 charged particles, one being an electron and one being a positron. And these 2 particles, at this minute scale, one is actually traveling forward in time and the other is traveling backward in time, which doesn't make sense to our real world. But that judgment for us is what creates an event in space-time, and in fact is what causes space-time. And the differences between the photon has this possibility that an infinite number of photons can occupy a finite space, whereas the positron, the electrons, which are fermions, No two fermions can occupy the same space. So what these two little things
can
do.
I ask you a question? So
Yeah.
if you were to tell this to normal people like me, because the words you use I can't follow, what does this mean for a small town girl like myself? How do you translate that for me to understand it, especially in the context of where we find ourselves in the world right now, being stuck and struggling with time?
So the cool part about it is to realize that these two little guys that we now create, these two particles, one positive and one negative, we make in our mind, but only one of them is conscious for ourselves. And the other one is unconscious and belongs in the realm of the shadow work. But, you know, if we look at things, we can try and put things back together again. And there's a beautiful story of this perception being created, in that it creates a judgment in ourselves. Okay, and for COVID now, COVID-19, this judgment becomes particularly acute. Okay, so time will slow down for us. Okay, and it's not that time slowed down, it's that we become quite stuck in time because this thing that's going on in our heads is overwhelming us, from the point of, like, we really fear that our future is in jeopardy, like our life is in jeopardy, our lifestyle is in jeopardy, all of that is in jeopardy, and that's what creates the stuckness. And we can put it back together. So one of the ways to do that, to get out of that stuckness, is to say, well, let's look for the opposite, because these two things are anti-symmetrical. So the trick is to say, fine, COVID is here. We are under stress. We're under duress. Like everything that we know of is threatened, and we think that things are going to be possibly much worse in the future than they were in the past. But we can change that perspective. We can say, how is this serving us? Like, how is it going to serve me going forward? What is it going to enable for me in terms of what's important to me? Like, so for me, I love technology, and this COVID crisis is thrusting us into the fourth industrial revolution, where we might have been dabbling in it. Suddenly we've just landed in it, and you know, with full force, forced to adopt Zoom, and to connect over these great networks.
Jordi, I just have another question for you as well. So if I understand you right, we've got these opposing particles moving, and you mentioned to me one is like memory and one is imagination. It's like the one is the past and one is the future, and in that we can get stuck and not really be in the now because of those opposing particles.
Yes, that's true. And essentially what it's done is it's taken us out of homeostasis, and all the practices we teach ourselves, mindfulness, breathing, meditation, are to bring that homeostasis back into together again. So those are all the techniques we use to get back to that one-to-one homeostasis. This memory and imagination, we have to essentially collapse the wave function, and if we do that, we actually birth light. A positron and electron, when we connect them back together again, we put them back together again, they annihilate and they emit a high intensity photon again.
And is that what you would call enlightenment? Is that kind of the closest one can get to?
Yeah, that to me, that would be the closest thing to bringing light to the mind. Okay, enlightenment is to bring these two negative perceptions, or these two anti-symmetric perceptions, back together again, annihilating them and birthing light in the mind.
Jordi, and you, I have one more question for you, because my RAM, I'm using all my RAM right now at the moment to understand. And I've got one more question for you. And I mean, I've heard you say that what leaders and entrepreneurs should do now is, how can this time now serve? What is positive here as well? It's not just negative, so that we can ask the right questions. That I hear you say it's all about questions now. The second thing, you've also spoken about time is beautiful. When I listen to you, I get the sense that you think it's beautiful. It's like music for you. Can you maybe say something about the observation of time and the beauty?
So yeah, so for me it is beautiful because with each of these judgments, these perceptions, emotions come out, and we experience these emotions with all our heart and with all our fear, with all our joy, our happiness, our sadness. But they're transient, they move on. And for me, each of those moments is like a note in a song. And like ultimately becomes a song of our life. Like these ups and these downs, the highs and the lows, the intensity and the pitches of the notes come together in a musical way. And it's beautiful, but to make the song, we have to go through each of these notes. And they are just that, they are just notes in a song. And what a spectacular symphony it all is, if we ride the wave and go with it and get to love and appreciate each note for what it is. It's a story, it's a song.
Thank you, Jordi. I hope you can stay on longer for other questions on that topic. And thank you for helping me connect with time is also music. And even, I think you shared with me, even Einstein was confused about time. So at least if you're not confused by the concept of time, you don't understand it. So thank you for your inputs. I wish we could have 2 or 3 hours listening to you, but thank you so much. We'll speak later. And from that perspective, I mean, Sonia, I've given you some hospital passes in the past. I've given you some tough follow-ups. I mean, let's just zoom back from outer space and photons and back to Sonia, who often helps me to make things understandable. Sonia, what would you like to bake for us today that's relevant to the topic?
Yeah, this might have been one of the more difficult passes so far, Casper. I think maybe just reflecting on where Jordi ended with, the idea of notes and a song, it just reminded me that, of the notion of flow. And I think to a large extent, our lives are flows through time and space. So time flows and we flow through time. So that's something that I was just reminded of. And I think one of those flows also has to do with cycles, and I came across, I spent some time with a philosopher a while ago, Alicia Joarero, and she spoke about the difference between what she calls chronos time, which is, what we almost experience as the linear flow of time, and the idea of kairos time, which is how I understand it, where time and context come together. So it's this idea of the opportune time. And maybe just linking back to where we started with William, I think very often we get so preoccupied with speeding up chronos time. Everything needs to be faster. We want to be more agile, all of these things that I think we miss these, let's call them kairos moments, where there's an opportunity for change and where, this idea of an opportune time. And I'm thinking, reflecting back to what Jordi said, I think maybe COVID for us is a bit of a kairos moment, where things can potentially, where there's the potential for things to shift. And to come back to your question about baking, so you've been teasing me for baking sourdough bread, so I thought I'll bring that in. But one of the things that interests me from a time perspective as well is the idea of rhythm and cycles. So you spoke about, this morning with William, that maybe that mind sweep was a breathing out, so breathing in and breathing out, it's a rhythm. And when you bake sourdough bread, there's also a rhythm. We call it stretch and fold. So it's while you are working with the dough, one way to create resilience in the structures in the dough so that when you put it in the oven and it starts to rise, the structures can actually hold and it doesn't collapse, is a process of stretching the dough and folding it. And I think over the last couple of, ever since we started, I think we've gone through several stretching processes, on this call. So we've been stretched from different perspectives. And I think now is a time for us to fold, to kind of reflect on what we've learned, to make some sense of everything that we've heard so far. And so I just wanted to introduce you guys to a process that we're going to be running for next week. You will get a link in the email that is sent out to a system that called SenseMaker. And we really want to encourage you guys to, from today onwards, start contributing some of your reflections, your learnings, but also some of the ideas that has emerged for you in terms of things that we might be able to do going forward. Because next week, we are going to be folding. We are going to be making sense together of all the stretching that's happened over the last, I don't know how many weeks it's been, Casper, 8 weeks. So yes, I think it's time for us to take a step back and reflect and make sense together. So please follow the link that we're going to send and contribute as many ideas and reflections as you like. We'd really appreciate that.
Thank you, Sonia. And for those of you who haven't been part of a SenseMaker product, Sonia, this is not an hour, 2 hour link. This is it's not an assessment, a questionnaire that you've never done before. It looks very different. It brings in the right brain, and people can even do it a few times if they wanted to. But it's a quick in and a quick out, Sonia. Am I correct?
Yeah, it all depends, Casper, on how detailed you want to be on the story or the idea that you shared. But yeah, it's not designed to be a very long instrument, and it's based on Dave Snowden's thinking and complexity and narrative. So it's very congruent with what we're doing here.
Thank you, Sonia. And more information afterwards for you available. So we listened and we got some perspective of the youth. Now, just one aspect that's important for us is we are not saying in this call that the elders are wise. That's why we want to speak about elder perspective. Thank you, William, for that. Because to say that the elders are wise, that means that we shouldn't be in the COVID disaster that we're sitting now, because it's most probably our elders, and including me, who made the mistakes. So we don't want to pitch elders as wisdom. We want to give you a perspective from elders today, and hopefully the wisdom will be the youth and the elders and all of us in this group getting together next week. That might be more wise perspective than just the elder one. So I can't let the elders wait any longer, because afternoon naps are, it's part of eldership. So and often an afternoon nap is around about 12 o'clock. So I'm very privileged tonight. I feel very special to introduce Dr. Claudius van Wyk. Claudius, I'm going to read here because it says that you are part of an evolutionary transformation group. You're the holism chair, and you access adaptive intelligence to deal with the daily challenges of complexity and uncertainty. I'm not sure how somebody with that descriptor can sit in the UK, but it sounds like an oxymoron for somebody like that to sit in the UK from our perspective. Thank you so much to Lizanne for just saying we have to get Claudius on, and many other people on this call were super excited to know you can share with us. So without asking you about wisdom, is there any perspective or story that you can share with us, Dr. van Wyk? It would be really appreciated.
It's great to be here. And it's great to open this little sharing around the issue of time. Last night, we watched the news. We were waiting for this magical moment when a spaceship would be launched, which anticipated the first commercial flights into space. And it couldn't go because the time wasn't right. The weather was not right. I'm thinking back at another magical moment And that moment was when Nelson Mandela was released from prison and walked out in Paarl. That was in February of 1990. I had the opportunity of meeting with him just a few months later in September of 1990. And that moment encounter and an indiscretion of mine put me on a new trajectory. A moment in time, a magical connection that would put me on a new trajectory. How did that happen? It happened through an indiscretion. I was at an event where Mandela was the guest of honor. It was the organization called Protech, which was there to encourage young Black folks who hadn't had the opportunity to get a technological education to be fast-tracked into the technological world. So if they had some talent in science, if they had some talents in mathematics, and if they were reasonably good in English, they would be fast-tracked through tertiary education into the technological world. And the organization I worked with sponsored that organization. Mandela was the guest of honor. And Winnie Mandela was there as well. It was her birthday. And so we sang happy birthday to Winnie, most of us whiteys. Now, my discretion was that in a back room, I actually told a Madiba joke. You remember at that time, there were lots of Mandela jokes. And in this indiscretion, I felt a hand on my arm, and it was Winnie. And she said, "Come with me, come and tell that story to the old man." So I was dragged in trepidation to meet with Mandela. My colleague who was with me came along as well. Fortunately, those days you didn't have a mobile phone that could take things that could later be posted to YouTube. And so she demanded that I tell Mandela the story, which I did and which he appreciated. But my colleague then challenged Nelson Mandela and challenged him with a statement that had been made by Gavin Raleigh just the week before, where Gavin said, "We don't mind if the ANC comes to power as long as the chaps don't mess with the economy. And so that was challenged. Mandela was challenged on that statement. And his response was significant. He poked us both in the chest very firmly with hands which at that time were very strong hands. You remember he had been breaking rocks. And he said, "You businessmen must tell us how to run the economy. We actually don't know how to run the economy. But you must tell us how to run it in a way that works for all South Africans." Now, in my mind at that time, the economy was what it was. You had the capitalist system or you had the socialist system. And hadn't we been fighting against the socialist system our whole lives? Wasn't that the source of all of our troubles? So what do you mean we must run the economy in a different way? It burned a hole into my mind. And so 2 years later, in fact, I went off and I established the little organization I've been working with ever since, Transformationist Strategies, and as you say, evolutionary transformations. But what was the lesson for me? The lesson was that the way things are is not the way things need to be. The present moment, the present state of affairs, the present condition is full of rich potential. And that potential is only as limited as the vision with which I look at that potential. To the extent this conversation that we've had about past and future, to the extent that I'm locking my anticipation of what might be into the framework of what was. And so it was a great gift for me to be challenged by Madiba on that issue, to begin to reflect. And through that, I met complexity theory. I met the Institute for New Economic Theory. I eventually started lecturing at Schumacher College on complexity economics. My lesson, things needn't be the way they are. There's huge potential if we can free up our prejudices. And I think essentially it is that magic conversation that can do that freeing up. And so that's my little piece, Caspar.
Oh, Dr. Claudius, it's not a little piece, not from my perspective, it's not where I sit, because and I just want to ask you one more question. Is now, so you're saying the lesson that we can, because the youth asked us, tell us, please share with us where we made mistakes. Are you saying that one of the mistakes we made was we thought there's only one way to run an economy? There's only our way. Is that what you're saying?
We got locked into a materialistic paradigm that said it is either capitalism or it is socialism, and it's all about who controls the resources. And the great insight was that I was limiting my own perspective in a materialistic perspective. And the real dynamical exchange of value is about relationship. That was the huge lesson that emerged for me out of that challenge.
Well, if I can now put on my LinkedIn profile that I have spoken to somebody who got grabbed by Nelson Mandela in the chest and taught a lesson. I'll update my LinkedIn profile ASAP. Thank you so much, and please come back to South Africa once we can fly again. We also do need you here, and thank you for being part of this call. We might
Just
need
let you know, I would have been there now had they not prevented us from flying.
Thank you. And interesting to move from Dr. Claudius van Wyk to somebody that he knows and she knows him as well is I would like to ask Maurice. Maurice Barak has been on most of our calls, and Maurice is just one of my favorite. I don't know what to call you, Maurice. Mentors, peers, co-workers. But Maurice she was born in Alexandria in Egypt. She worked in places like Paris, London, USA, Canada, and I think it's just amazing, Maurice, that we have you here because you are, for me in South Africa, the specialist in a methodology called time to think. Now, time to think, there's never been a time in our lives more where it's time to think. But before you maybe tell us about that, what's the story? What wisdom can you share with us in this call? And thank you for dialing in, jumping into this room from another place where you had to deliver your services. And let's just check if Maurice,
Yeah.
if you can unmute.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
I'm good. Can you all hear me? Thank you so much for this invitation. It's good to see you, Claudius. I must tell you, my heart's beating quite a lot, and thank you for the invitation for a story. I'm just going to put my timer on so that I stick to time. It's going to be quite a personal story, and the reason why I chose it is because I've been very inspired actually by the transparency and the vulnerability that I have witnessed week after week on these calls. That's given me the courage to share this with you. So in terms of eldering, I actually quite like the term just because I've now entered into my 70s and it's an extraordinary experience of discovery. The story I want to tell you takes me back to my early 40s, and it will relate, you will see, to this time element, which I found fascinating, and to the combination of memory and imagination and what occurs in the spark in between. I believe that every decade or era, if you like, has a question that we're being asked to live into. And in my 40s, I really, really wanted a mentor. I wanted a mentor so much. It was a good life, but I knew that to go into the next era, I wanted somebody. And I wanted her so much that I sort of wrote out a job description with all the qualities that this woman would need to have, that I would engage with, and that she would sort of shine the light, if you like, without telling me what to do. That she would have qualities of humor, that she wouldn't take me seriously, that she would be playful, things that I didn't have. And although I knew many women, there was one who stood out, who is about 16 years older than me. And I plucked up the courage to ask her to be my mentor. And 30 years ago, mentoring and all of that wasn't like that common as it is today. So I asked her, and she said no. She said, geez, my life is in such a mess. There's no way I can mentor anybody. And I was shocked. But for some reason, something really happened in that moment of spark where I understood that I would connect with myself for the next, I would give myself 20 years. I figured 20 years was a good amount of time to become this woman that I had chosen, who'd said, no, I can't be that for you now. And that was hugely auspicious for me because it reframed my whole life in, I suppose, like a 20-year training program that was very deeply private to me, that would enable me to see what was coming in a way that had purpose, so that my image was that, you know, by the time I die, I want to be as completely me as is possible. And so being in my mid-40s then, obviously, I got all the usual experiences that you've all had of teenagers, deaths, my own experience with a sort of a heavy duty cancer experience. But they were all framed into, this is specifically designed for you to be this woman. And it changed everything. 5 years ago, the 20 years were up. No, the 10 years ago or so, 5 years, whatever. I became very aware that my era that I'd given myself was coming up. You know, it was like ending. There were certain things I hadn't learned. There was masses that I had. One of the things I had wanted was a deep contentment in being present. I think I'm getting okay with that. I still take myself seriously. I'm not very playful yet, but it transformed something. And now in my 70s, I look to what is the question being asked now. There were some notes I made for myself about seeking the question that I'm living into in this era. So I think that's my 5 minutes. That was just a few bits of the way I work my life. And obviously there's so much beside. But there's one thing I do want to add, just because Simon, I think, is on the call. And when I was very ill 10 years ago or 11, and I first went to him and he said something to me, which was a question that even may be useful for us now. It was just after my diagnosis. And he said to me, you know, Marise, you've been through the worst already. And I made that into a question that if I knew that I've been through the worst already, how will I move forward? And that changed everything. And so I think that's about polarities and moving forward. So thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Marise. And I just, for myself, just for a moment, maybe just, if you're okay where you're sitting, just maybe ask that question or maybe that statement for yourself. Maybe we are, like Marise said, we've mentored ourselves to be here right now. We are trained for this, and maybe if this is the worst, you know, we can go forward. So maybe just for a moment, allow yourself a deep breath. Just maybe pause in silence after the sharing of two very special elders on this call. And for a moment, just to get in touch with our own elders inside ourselves. And your breath is as old and as new as you are. So 2 breaths in, 2 breaths out might be a good way just to connect with that beautiful message or messages. And Dr. Weitzman or Simon, I promise you I didn't brief Marise bring you into the conversation. Just trust the flow. But Maurice did bring you into the conversation. So this is not a hospital pass. It's an up and under if you're a rugby fanatic. But so thank you, Maurice. Over to you, Simon. If you could say whatever you need to say.
Thank you. Thanks, Casper. Hi, everybody. And thanks, Maurice. I remember that moment vividly. It's still alive in my mind and my heart, which goes to show that at some level there is no time when it comes to matters of the heart. It's quite a thing to follow on Claudius and Maurice, the wise elders. And then, of course, my forward pass will be to another wise elder, Nobantu. So I'll just, in a very brief time, just by way of transitioning, I wanted to bring up something that I shared in the latter part of last week's session, where in the last 20 minutes, once many of you had logged off, and it's actually a piece of science. And before I go there, I just want to read you a quote from Blaise Pascal, who's a 17th century French mathematician. He said, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." And it's very interesting. In 2014, Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia discovered this is in fact true. In a series of experiments, I won't go into the details of which, the bottom line conclusion was that 65% of men, as opposed to 25% of women, would rather give themselves electrical shocks than sit quietly in a room doing nothing for 15 minutes. This is quite a staggering thing, especially if you're a man, and somewhat more amusing if you're a woman. And it raises the question: how can we be with our own minds, our own bodies, our own hearts? How can we be with ourselves? And by extension, how can we be with each other? The underlying movement leans, as I say that, towards the African wisdom of Ubuntu, and not so much as a concept, but as a lived reality. I am because you are. How I am, and how I am, as Claudius has mentioned, in relationship to you. And T.S. Eliot, in his exquisite poem, one of the lines, he says, "And do not call it fixity where past and future are gathered." This quality of being invites us into the present moment, which is not fixed in time, is trans-temporal, is not wedged between the past and the future, but is ever present and infinite in all directions. So Nobantu, as a bridge into your sharing of the perspective of the elders, what is your sense of how presencing and compassion, matters of the heart, can serve us to engage healthily and skillfully at this time?
Thank you, Simon. I still feel like I've been transported across time and space. Thank you, Claudius. I knew Claudius in the 90s. He was my teacher and a mentor in a way. And it's amazing, as he was sharing, I found myself being present in a space across time and space. And as he was sharing, I'm looking outside, a big feather was falling. And right there and then, I felt myself being just energy, because I think that's what being transported in time and space is about. I became part of what he was talking about. I became part of the conversation. That's when you find, when you are in that state, you become everything and all. And that's where the dancer becomes the dance. I was there in that room when he was talking about Madiba because I've experienced being in Madiba's presence. I was in the story with Maurice because I've been through that as well. And the questions, how do we look into these questions to be what guides us? And the fact that whatever brought us here is not what is going to take us forward. And from these two amazing stories are, on time and space is, it's about, both stories talk about the space in between. Talking about the space between what was and what could be, and also looking at a conversation, and even with that, both the words that we share in a conversations and the silence both form part of that dialogue. And how do we tap into that space? We don't tap into that space because we become cognitive, but it's again through being relational, through Ubuntu, through connecting. And what connects us most is coming from the heart. It's coming from the gut. I mean, right now we know that we have a lot in our gut. We think with our gut more than we use the brain. And as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking how much these heart sets, these heart minds, they actually make us more who we are, more in this time. And if we're looking into that, how then do we move beyond? Because these two stories are talking about two important things about there not being or not having any polarities, the non-duality of what is happening, and coming from a place of saying, I see you, Sawubona. And then when I see you, I allow you, through connecting to your heart, to feel that you are present, to feel that I am here in the corner. So as we go with that, I would like us to really arrive. And as we arrive, I would like us to really connect deeper to those that have come before us. And two things that connect us to those that have been before us. It's our hearts and our guts. When we have a child born in the African traditions, the umbilical cord is cut and it is buried in a sacred place, because that's what connects us to the ancestors. And as we connect to the ancestors and those that have come before us, this brings us to the present to the shaping of who we are in the moment, and across time and space, that allows us then to be able to become who we are destined to be. And as we are in this heart and in this connection with our ancestors, let us contemplate deeply, what ancestor am I gonna be when I transcend this life? And being an ancestor, it's not about being an elder. Being an ancestor moves from whichever generation, from whichever age. So all of us, no matter what generation you are, just contemplate, what ancestor am I gonna be? And as we contemplate this, what's coming to my mind is a young ancestor who has since passed recently in South Africa because of COVID. A 2-day-old baby who was born out of a mother who was COVID positive. And with this baby, because he could not make it because of the different circumstances we are living in, the baby could not make it, the lungs could not be strong enough. So let's contemplate holding our hearts and holding another hand on our bellies, feeling into your body, feeling the vibrations, feeling the sensations. We contemplate on the question, what kind of an ancestor am I gonna be? Connecting across time, across space, with those that came before us, with who we are right now, and who we are going to be.
Thank you, Nobantu, for asking that question in such a heartfelt way. Thank you to everyone who made time and space available for this call. We will stay on for at least half an hour longer for those who would like to engage in rich conversations. The rest of you, we will hopefully see you next week. Go out there, go and save the world. Thank you so much.